Live from London, it's Plank of the Week with Mike Graham.
Welcome to a very festive Plank of the Week. Well, why not? It is actually almost Christmas. At 7 p.m, it's Friday night, and you know what happens then. It's when we judge who has been the biggest plank of this particular week, and there have been plenty of them. I'm delighted to say that to help me in my quest tonight, we've got Geddes, a veteran of this particular venture. We've got Isabel Oakeshott as well joining us, our international TV editor. We've got Walker, a man himself of the TV station, and of course Reem Ibrahim with plenty of thoughts on who should be the plank of this particular week. Now, I don't know whether you can see the plank through all of this snow that we've got here, the festive snow, but here it is. We're going to put it down there, and there it disappeared. Who knew? Now I don't have to move it. I can leave it there for the whole time, unusually for me. Now, Geddes is going to kick us off. Who's been the biggest plank for you this week?
Well, I think this is incredibly festive, Mike, and it is the Liverpool pantomime production of Aladdin.
Ah, yes.
Which has stirred up all the woke amongst the United Kingdom.
Yes.
Because of their very, very controversial casting. Not only, and I'm not referring to the cast members of Coronation Street,
no.
of present and old, but of the individuals that have not considered the diversity that you should obviously have with Aladdin, because evidently it needs to have a very Oriental cast.
Oh, yes. Can you even say Oriental?
I believe it's actually in the lyrics of one of the Aladdin songs.
Right, because I was never sure where Aladdin was from. I thought he was from somewhere in the Levant.
Yeah, so did I. I thought it was somewhere.
In the Middle East.
Yeah.
Because I was always called Princess Jasmine as a kid, and I loved it. I think it's brilliant. But I think we should let maybe some other ethnicities have a go at being Princess Jasmine.
Why not? Why not? I mean, in the same way as Ben Kingsley did such an awesome job of being Gandhi. Or Daniel Day-Lewis of My Left Foot.
Yes.
I mean, the thing I always thought about actors was it's acting.
Yes.
It's not supposed to be necessarily an accurate portrayal. And then you take things like pantomime, which are probably drawing further on the imagination.
So what's actually happened to Liverpool then?
So literally they've kicked off. All the various actors' unions have kicked forward and said, look, this is completely wrong. You need to have a more diverse cast. And I think ultimately it's going to probably draw in more crowds. I don't think they've actually stopped the pantomime itself. I don't know, but
because there's been a few cases, haven't there, of Aladdin productions that have actually been cancelled because people have said, "Oh no, we can't be doing this. This is absolutely all wrong."
Yeah, it becomes very difficult, doesn't it? Because I think all these theatre productions originally from China, so you could have somebody who's Chinese. Aladdin himself is supposed to be Arabic.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
From the Levant, he's from somewhere near sort of Syria, Iraq, sort of area.
What you would probably have to find is probably somebody who's Arab, immigrant to China to play the role. And I'll be honest with you, as somebody who went to school in Liverpool, there's precious few of them.
Well, you would have thought. Also, they're going to struggle to find an actual genuine genie, aren't they? You know, who can actually go in and out of a bottle without pretending that he's
maybe someone who
real.
could identify as a genie. I don't know.
Yes, I was hearing today about somebody who identified as a tiger. And somebody suggested, well, why don't you put them in the zoo with the tigers and see how long they identify as a tiger for?
But actually, in truth, this is the way to solve all of this. And I know it's not strictly related, but you look at something like the Labour Party, they want to have a more diverse leader, whatever. Well, all that the leader has to do, all Starmer has to do is go, I'm a woman, and therefore he'd qualify. So, I mean, I just think it's very easy. So my advice...
But he's not sure what one of those is, though.
But my advice to people in Aladdin, if they want a more diverse cast, they should just self-define themselves as black, Asian, gay, straight, women,
that might be the easy option, actually, Andre. Maybe that's the way around it. And simply say, and don't offend me because I've identified as a genie, or I've identified
I am trans-black.
Yeah.
Do you think this is just some kind of very unsubtle kind of publicity stunt? I mean, is the whole thing being kind of
properly kicked off?
I don't think people are that clever.
A lot of people who got very upset about this.
I mean,
I'm quite surprised, actually. Because Liverpool may be quite a left-wing place, but it's not classically associated with the metropolitan elite, is it? Let's be totally honest.
No, it's not that kind of woke, is it? I mean, it's more likely, to get them to chase you down the street because you might have voted Tory and throw rocks at you. But it's not the kind of place where they go, oh, you can't be doing that because that might offend us.
Yeah, but I think the representative thing is the fact that it's actually most of the complaints and the arguments have not actually come from Liverpool. They've come from everywhere else in the United Kingdom. And so everybody wants to get their little fingers into it and have their little opinion.
And I bet nobody in the
little say.
audience actually had a problem with the
Why would they
diversity
care?
of the
I'm sure that
cast.
none of the kids, presumably it's mostly kids in the audience.
Well, I don't know.
But it isn't made up.
Never know.
I'll tell you what I love about this discussion, right? We are a bunch of journalists sitting here in 2022 and we know full well, don't attack the Scousers because they'll hunt you like an animal.
Exactly.
So whatever criticism is going to be levelled at anyone
nothing
today,
to do with the
Liverpool will not be
Liverpool.
attacked in any way whatsoever.
Well, we can maybe attack them for actually going to see the thing, which is obviously such a dreadful...
Well, I mean, I see more diversity needing to get maybe members of the cast of EastEnders rather than just all Coronation Street stars.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Speaking
how do they fill up
is this
pantomimes
the
in Liverpool?
poster we've got here?
This is it. It's
That
an
looks like-
all-white cast, apparently.
Is
so
that right?
it's whitewashed.
Terrible.
How do
Shocking.
they fill up a panto in Liverpool now? Brookside's not on the TV.
Unbelievable. Speaking of Coronation Street, did you see that story this week that Bob Dylan apparently is a fan of Coronation
Really?
Street? And they're thinking about putting him in it.
But I thought Bob
nights.
Dylan's a bit mad these days, isn't he?
I think he must be, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, God almighty. Anyway, that's enough about him. Isabel, you've got the next plank. Who have you got for us?
Yeah, well, since it's a season of loving and giving and being generous, I thought I would extend my nomination not to one individual, but to an entire organisation. And my nomination goes to HMRC.
Very
Oh,
good. Yeah.
Because
Worthy
this is the time of year, isn't it, where you're just contemplating the utter doom and misery that is your self-assessment tax return. And should you, by any chance, be foolish enough to think you'll just ring HMRC because maybe they can help you answer the odd question that you might have, prepare for a very long, probably indefinite wait, who knows, because I basically gave up. Listening to the usual, because of the current circumstances, whatever they are this time, it's going to take us forever to get to your call. And to add insult to injury, while you're listening to this nonsense about how you're going to have to wait forever, you also get a recorded message that tells you all about how diverse HMRC's team
Well,
is.
at least they're diverse.
Well,
that's all you need. It doesn't matter you can't get through to them. At least
they're diverse, and while they're at it, whilst they're telling you about how diverse they are, they also give you a lecture about how they won't take any abuse. And I'm kind of thinking, I would actually like the opportunity to give you some abuse.
Yes.
It would be a luxury to have someone answer the phone so that I could be slightly abusive.
Yeah.
But if you go to any decent business, if you go into M&S or your local pub, there's no signs up saying, if you attack our staff, you'll be prosecuted. It's only companies where they know the staff are so rude and incompetent that it's likely you'll get angry.
I give you London Underground, or pretty much any airports,
But that's another one.
It's also the irony of getting you...
isn't there?
It's
That's
the irony
another
of
one.
having you wait, which is only going to compound your
anger.
It's just going to fester and build.
Yeah.
Our staff are so
explode.
obnoxious, please don't fund them.
Please don't hurt
Also,
us.
why is it that civil service is so obsessed with this diversity thing? Because they really
I
are, aren't they?
don't know. I actually thought I'd have a look and see if there are any jobs going in diversity in HMRC. And guess what? There's loads of jobs. You can get a job there. And I did notice as well that so many of the HMRC positions advertised are working from home.
Yes, of
so
course.
no wonder no one's answering
That's the diversity tick for lazy git.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
At least half the staff have to be lazy.
But it's just that with the diversity thing. I mean, I don't care who's stealing my money. I don't care what colour they are. They're still stealing our money. And so I think it's...
And then
we're all going to
wasting
hate
it.
them. Exactly.
And then
they're
making out that
wasting
they're
it.
giving you something back by giving you,
Exactly.
some kind of free money so that you can pay the extortionate electricity bill that you just had.
Well,
And also, all
Pay
that
all
money
the
that we're
tax.
spending, why can't they get more call handlers so at least they can deal with
Well,
that? Surely
exactly.
it's
That seems to be
counterproductive.
their kind of their core offer, really. It's a call centre. So basically, the fundamental thing you need to do is pick up the phone.
Yeah.
No, this
And
seems
it's funny,
to be
isn't it?
beyond
Because actually, it used to the tax people actually used to be quite good at that. HMRC, whenever you did, because I mean, you like me have spent most of your life, self-employed, and so you quite often end up having to call them to ask them about things.
But they're quick enough to get back in touch when you owe them money.
They actually used to be really good, though.
Civil servants are all bad at each other. I had a great example. I had a friend of mine who wanted to move where their drive was. So you have to drop the curb. You have to get approval from the local curb officer.
Yeah.
Can you believe that exists?
Curb officer.
The curb officer. So over an 18-month period, they kept emailing the curb officer at the local council until they discovered that they'd sent literally the chief executive of the council round to this bloke's house to find him because he couldn't do the site visit. He'd moved to Australia. He'd lived in Australia for a year, literally a year, and not turned up for his job at all.
So
And then they
British,
contacted him and
isn't
they
it?
said, but you're
So
supposed to be a
British.
curb officer. And he said, well, when I moved to Australia and nobody noticed, I just continued claiming the salary.
Absolutely incredible.
That is brilliant.
But I mean, the one thing you will probably find out if you ever do get through to them is that you haven't paid them enough and you'll need to pay them some more
this
money.
is the whole point of me ringing, was that they were chasing me for something I'd already paid.
Yeah.
I kind of resent more letters saying, you haven't responded to our last one. Yes, I have, and I paid it, and that's why I'm ringing you, but you won't answer the phone, so I guess you're going to send me more
There
letters.
is a kind of horror that fills me whenever I reach the point of no return with any of these organisations where you go, you've exhausted all other means of contact and you have to ring them.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh...
Really.
And I think they do deliberately set it up so that when you're pressing the options buttons, that if you do press the wrong one, because you've got fat fingers like me, you can't go back into it. You have to dial back from the start.
I'll tell you what,
Or you get cut off and then you go back and nobody knows who you are and you go, well, I was talking to somebody earlier.
Yeah.
So?
I hate
Is this a modern thing?
I hate those circular phone systems where it goes, press 2, press 3, press 4, and then it goes back to the original menu.
Yeah.
You think, does anybody actually exist in this?
I think this is a modern thing, though, where we just don't want to speak on the phone anymore. Nobody wants to answer
It's
the
a
phone.
great ruse. It's a brilliant ruse. If you're selling phone systems, I guess it's all right. Andre, you've got the next one.
Yeah, well, we've talked a little bit about the NHS and the way that I think a lot of us now don't have the great respect that we previously had for the institution. Obviously, there's been the ambulance drivers and other NHS workers out on strike.
They don't like it when you call them ambulance drivers, even though they are actually ambulance drivers.
Well, I'd have to say I call them lazy, and I call them a waste of space. I'm really angry about this. I'll tell you what, just for the record, I didn't applaud the NHS. Can't stand the institution.
No.
And the reality is, right, they've had this independent pay review, which is recommended. I mean, it's sums that vary 4 to 5%, and they've decided that they don't want to have it. Now, look, at the end of the day, people who are actually going out working are the people that pay for the public sector. You know, it's government policy that has put us in this situation. We have effectively committed ritual suicide with our economy, and there comes a point where you have to say no more. And frankly...
They've also had 4%, the nurses and the NHS have had 4% back in April of this year.
I mean, look, to be honest with you, I don't buy this whole, these people are all marvellous and whatever, and the whole NHS thing. I'll tell you the other thing that annoys me, in addition to the ambulance drivers, where you hear the BMA going, we need less private sector involvement in the NHS. Every single GP is a private sector healthcare body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? They never mention that, do they?
They also never mentioned that half of the doctors that are employed by the NHS and trained by us and trained and paid for by us are also working in the private sector. They're privatising themselves. It's not the Tories doing it, they're doing it.
What happens, you go to a specialist and they go, oh, look, come back in 2 months or I can see you tomorrow. How does that work?
Yeah.
Well, I do private 2 days a week. Oh, do you? Oh, and what is it? There's in the same clinic in the NHS hospital. I wonder how much you're paying in rent.
It's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers.
Look, I think we need to have this really honest conversation about the NHS. And I think that a lot of the time we see, they're sort of clapping every Thursday. We seem to think about the NHS sort of this sacred cow. And anybody that sort of criticises it, especially the definitely a cow, but especially the Tories, if they go near and sort of try and reform the NHS, people just point fingers and claim that they're attempting to abolish the whole institution. Well, I say just do it.
But
if people think you're already doing it, just get rid of it.
The difference between the NHS cow and a real cow, of course, is the cow's actually milking us. That's the problem.
I'll tell you, but the first election I ever remember as a child was 1987. And the big issue in that election was the Tories were going to sell the NHS.
Yeah.
Right, Labour's been running this for so many... Why don't we just do it?
Exactly.
Just get on with it.
Well, I mean, it can't get any worse. It's now
No.
literally... I mean, I was saying this to Isabel last night when we were doing another show. They've had 2 days of nursing strikes. They've had 1 day of ambulance strikes. Nothing has changed. It's because they do so little now that actually it didn't make any difference. The fact that there were no ambulances didn't matter. The fact that there were nurses on the picket lines, although I've got an issue with that, because I don't think actually that many frontline nurses were actually on strike physically anyway. And an awful lot of those picket lines, I think, were made up of other kind of... I think a lot of them were made up of other unions, other people who were joining in and deciding to go, let's...
Well, I've got a very good friend of mine who's the managing director of cancer care at a major NHS trust, and she said that she'd personally written 300 letters to people to the nurses saying that these people, their lives will be shortened as a result of your strike. But because they weren't going to die that week and they weren't on chemotherapy, Or because she said, look, if you cancel this operation, it's only going to happen in 4 months' time, and cancer is progressive.
Yeah.
But she said not one single letter came back with a positive answer. They just said, if they're not going to die this week, we're not interested.
Yeah.
Wow.
Shameful.
No,
Incredibly selfish. And what I find interesting is that most of these strikes are either occurring in the public sector or in recently privatised sectors. You don't really see people in the private sector striking because...
You don't see Weatherspoons.
Well, yeah, exactly, because employers are able to sort of chase it up in the private sector. In the public sector, wages haven't been able to rise in the same way that they have in the private sector.
Yeah.
What this shows to me is actually, if we actually do abolish the NHS, get rid of it, get rid of this bureaucratic black hole and stop pumping taxpayer money into it, nurses will be paid more. They will earn more in the private sector.
I don't think you're going to vote Labour, are you?
No, I wear red, but it's really for
There
Christmas.
is no party for her to vote for because no party would ever propose that,
That's right.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and at the moment, under the Conservative government, we've got the highest taxes on record. I mean, there is no party really for someone like...
Basically, Labour is the only party that could do this, and I just can't somehow see Keir Starmer
can't see them
going
being strong enough
anywhere
to
down
actually
that
push
route.
The problem is in all of these things, and it's so often on Planks of the Week or Plank of the Week, is that people are just pander. In the 1940s and 1950s, government didn't say that it was going to give you a bailout. It said times are going to be hard.
Yeah.
And I think also, all of these lockdowns, all of the engorgement of the NHS, the terrible way the system's run, it was set up badly. Nobody will ever reform it. Yeah. And actually, then all we do is stick it all on the credit card and hope somebody's going to pay.
But what's happening now is the credit card company is starting to squeeze.
Yes.
And starting to say, well, you can't just keep putting it off and putting it down to just paying interest only. You've now got to actually start paying some of the real money back.
Yeah.
I was listening to, obviously this week there's been a lot of historical conversations about the NHS and who set it up. And apparently when Nye Bevan set it up, there was a lot of argument at the time about how it was going to be paid for. Because nobody actually believed...
the BMA actually opposed it.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
The BMA opposed it, and people didn't believe that he could have a model that could make it actually economically viable.
Yeah.
He somehow managed to convince people. But I think now, actually, it's not economically viable anymore.
Well, it was a completely different set of circumstances then. I mean, you had a much smaller population, much smaller and a much less ageing demographic, and the NHS wasn't trying to do everything.
No.
Yeah,
it wasn't busying itself changing people's genders and all of that, and they wasn't trying to do IVF and
what Bevan thought was that it would be effectively a short-term project. So you would have the NHS for a long time, but what you would do is you would bring in doctors, everyone would be treated, health would go up, disease would go down, and that would be a kind of one-off attack. So he never envisaged it being at that level forever.
No, absolutely not. But I mean, the NHS is not up for grabs here. It's ambulance strikes and the ambulance strikers. Now, they're claiming they're going to do more ambulance strikes. The thing that also puzzles me about yesterday and why actually nobody had been affected by it is apparently people didn't call for ambulances. Now, does that tell you
everything you need to know?
Does that tell you that
don't call an ambulance unless it's an emergency?
Yeah.
Well, sorry, how's that different to what's the actual?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that a lot of people clearly just call ambulances because they fancy a lift to the hospital.
Yes.
And yesterday they didn't do it.
Yes.
I think they should be charged.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to a point where now,
agree.
look, people have had enough education. They've been told enough times, don't call an ambulance because you've cut your finger or whatever. I don't know whether it's a flat rate for everybody. Obviously, you can't ask people for cash when they've been in a road traffic accident.
Take credit
but afterwards you could give a bill, or there must be a system.
there have been cases.
By the way, other countries
there have been
do this,
cases
some
where
other
people,
countries.
there have been cases where people who have been in accidents have actually got a bill afterwards. But that's enough of the NHS. Now, I'm going to make a complaint already because this is a seasonal special here on the Plank of the Week show, and you're all being far too serious. So you have to start getting a bit funnier, otherwise you'll all be fired. So coming next, we're going to be looking at that lovely royal couple from Montecito. I can imagine just what you think of them. And also, into that group, we'll throw a comedian, except he's not very funny. This is Plank of the Week. Back after this. Here we are. Ho, ho, ho. Welcome back to a very festive Plank of the Week. As you can see, we're getting into the spirit of things here at talkTV Towers. I've got lots of great guests and lots of great planks coming up. But it's now Reem Ibrahim's turn. Reem, you get the gold star, I guess, for having to talk about the dreaded couple.
The dreaded couple, indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, our favourite royal couple, Harry and Meghan, fantastic. They really wanted a private life. They wanted to be able to live in the US without much media attention. So, of course, they put out a 6-part Netflix documentary because that makes perfect sense. I mean, what really annoyed me about this documentary is, you know, of course, that they're free to do as they wish, but they sort of completely trashed the royal family, claiming, you know, all of these sort of racist claims that they've made in the past. But then they touched on this idea of colonialism. And Meghan decided to sort of say that actually, you know, we need to be really, you know, talk about this uncomfortable past of British history. Nobody's uncomfortable talking about it. We have acknowledged it. We've spoken about it. We've moved past it. And Meghan is what she's doing at the moment is she's importing an American conception of race relations to the United Kingdom that just does not apply. It just does not happen here.
It's the biggest cultural import from the United States of America in decades. But the other thing I loved about the Netflix documentary was him sort of going, oh yeah, we want to get our own jobs, but let's support the Queen as well. No, what you wanted to do was wander around a few parties and then turn up in America and profiteer from it.
Exactly right.
I mean, I just think it's disgusting. I think
really is. It's extraordinary. And I mean, the whole kind of week began with the first sort of 3 episodes and ended with the final 3 episodes. And then the next bit was, can we not get an apology? And it's sort of like, you know, so it's just like going to somebody's house, completely wrecking it, and then ringing up the next morning and saying, can I have an apology for wrecking your house? You know, you can't. Get lost.
I finished watching the whole thing. I actually did suffer through the whole thing. And I have to say that there were just lots of really sly digs at the brother and against his father and the family. And even even Her Majesty, you know, the later Queen Elizabeth, that she sort of stood back and didn't get involved whilst everybody else took chunks out of them. And I just thought this was just so imbalanced.
Well, isn't it possible the reason the Queen stood back was because her husband was dying at the time?
Yeah.
And I thought the other thing when Meghan, well, it was reported in all the press, presumably from her press team, that she demanded a significant role in the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. And you think, well, like my niece had a significant role in my mum's funeral, but she didn't demand it so she could be on TV. I mean, it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the colonialism thing was the most jarring of the whole thing. Because I must admit, you're going to hate this, I actually quite enjoyed watching the documentary as a kind of schmaltzy, let's look at the clothes, let's look at the property, loved all of that. But wheeling out kind of left-wing commentators, as they regularly did, to talk about Britain's imperial past, you're only really saying one thing with that, aren't you? Yes. And presenting loads of pictures of slavery and stuff. You are basically saying this is a nation that is steeped in racism. And not just that this is our past, but that this is somehow relevant to Meghan and Harry in the present. And I think it's an absolute insult to the UK today. We are not a racist nation. Of course there are pockets of awful behaviour and prejudice, far less, by the way, than there are in America. But for her to get on a high horse, for the pair of them to get on their high horse and give everybody a history lesson about Britain's past, I think is absolutely reprehensible.
I also looked at it from a security perspective, and there was all the talk about them being harassed when they were on Vancouver Island. I've been to Vancouver Island, and it's very quiet, very peaceful. And they kept repeating the same shots of just one bloke on a boat, on a rib, and one guy who came up to the gate. And surely if they had all the camera footage, they had all the CCTV, they would have had stacks of stuff which they could have put up, even if they pixelated the identities. And then there was about the threats. And I've looked after clients who have been, you know, of sufficient standing, that they've received loads of horrific threats. Yeah, it happens. If you go into that position, you go into that status, you go to that profile, but it all comes with the territory.
Doesn't it feel like they're soliciting it?
No, but the point is, they're not soliciting anything. The point is they're not actually being harassed. That's the point.
No, exactly.
No, but the media wouldn't have cared if they didn't put out the 6-part documentary. That's my issue. The sort of this idea that they wanted a private life, they didn't want the media attacking them, so then they put out this documentary. Doesn't make sense. I think, Isabel, you're absolutely right about the entire notion about colonial history. We don't have institutional racism in the same way that the US, these Black Lives Matter organisations claim to do. And I think what I'm seeing now is Meghan is importing that conception of race relations to the UK, which does not apply.
They're basically
well, she wasn't here long enough to understand, was she?
Well, no, she doesn't get it. They're monetising slavery, and they're also making hay from his dead mother's memory. And that, I think, is the worst thing of all. But we've got to move on.
Truth, though.
Yeah, we've got to move on because they're nobody special. They don't get any more time than anybody else. You know, it's just Harry and Meghan, just another set of planks. So my set of planks will now continue with Joe Lycett. This is my first
What's happened now?
nomination. Well, you might remember that poor old David Beckham
Yeah.
Well, when I say poor old David Beckham, very wealthy David
not poor,
Beckham,
is he?
got a bucket load of money from the Qataris for promoting Qatar before the World Cup, during the World Cup, and probably after the World Cup as well, because they gave him so much money and he was very happy to say anything. Now, you can have an issue with that. You can say, well, he shouldn't be doing it, but he takes the money and he speaks out on their behalf, and that's a plain and simple deal, which may or may not be grubby. If he wants to do it, I don't care. Joe Lycett, however, who claims to be a comedian, I've yet to see any evidence of that. It doesn't seem very funny to me. But like all lefty comedians, you know, he has to only speak to one audience and then make stupid jokes about Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, and they all fall about laughing. But he took it upon himself to be the moral arbiter of those people who think Qatar's a terrible place because they don't like gay people and they're not very nice to migrant workers. So he accused David Beckham of selling out. He challenged him to give the money back or to give it to charity. And he said if he didn't do that, he would basically torch and shred £10,000 of cash, which everybody thought was a bit crass. And then he realised it was a bit crass. And he went, actually, when I did do that, it was fake money. He now claims to have given £10,000 to a charity of his choice.
Not produced the receipt, though.
We don't know whether
that's
true.
I'm
sure he has. I'm sure Joe Lycett wouldn't absolutely lead us astray. Even more ridiculously, it turns out this week that he actually performed himself in Qatar.
No.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
But actually, Mike, he is worse. Because if you watched Have I Got News For You and you watched what Gary Neville said, Gary Neville believed that it was his duty to go wherever the Football World Cup was, get paid, and then moan a little bit about the Qataris. Joe Lycett said that it is morally wrong for you to go to Qatar and perform there. That goes against gay rights, it goes against women's rights, and it's in favour of slavery. Now, he believes that, and he went. Now, Neville doesn't believe that. So Neville actually is less of a hypocrite than Joe Lycett.
And to be less of a hypocrite... For Gary Neville to be less of a hypocrite than anybody.
Oh, it's a high bar.
Always
a high bar.
It turns out, because that doesn't mean he's not a hypocrite, by the way, but Joe Lycett definitely takes the biscuit for hypocrisy this week because not only did he go there, but he then justified it, right? Because, of course, he didn't mention it when he was having a go at Beckham. But in his statement afterwards, he said, well, yes, I did go there, but effectively it wasn't for very much money and I wasn't very famous. So that's all right.
He also offered the following explanation. He said, I wasn't paid by the Qataris, I was paid by a UK agency. Now, the idea that the Emir of Qatar personally hands you a bag of money is just absolutely nonsense.
I think, to be fair, that's what happened with David Beckham. He did get the bag of money from the Qatari Emir.
I mean, there is a difference, though. I don't know whether Plank of the Week ever really seeks to be entirely fair, but if we were going to be a little bit
We strive
fair,
for it all the time.
He wasn't actually paid to promote Qatar in the way that David Beckham was. From what he gave as description of the gig he did, it was a gig that he was paid by, we don't quite know where the money traces back to, but it's not a huge sum of money, and it's him doing what he normally does rather than promoting
make no
Qatar.
one laugh.
So I don't know. I mean, it was years ago. I'm not bothered. I know it's not for me to judge.
But how can you turn around
I think the
say...
fact is that he made such a big thing of Qatar. And I mean, I know this is your argument because we had this row the other day.
And you didn't understand.
No, I did understand, but I think you're not seeing the whole picture because I think by going to any, like for example, if you were going to North Korea to do a speaking tour, right? But you were not being paid.
No one's offered me one.
But you were not being paid by the government. You would still be doing a favour to North Korea.
I do agree
because
with
you know
that.
what I mean. So you would be going there and effectively legitimising what it is that they do. So that's what kind of he did, in my view. Right? So he's legitimised. Shut up for a minute. He's legitimised. The Qatari regime, and then he's had a go at other people for doing exactly the same thing. That's why I think he's a hypocrite.
If the Qataris were sat here, and thank God they're not, they would say that they weren't promoting Qatar, they were promoting the World Cup in Qatar. Presumably he participated in publicity for whatever event he did in Doha.
And he's so up his own backside, right? He went, I was so secret about it that I put it in my book. Well, like, has anybody here read Joe Lycett's book? Because I haven't.
Yeah,
of course, that seems like a pretty good place to hide news, that, because nobody bought it, you know.
But I personally see no issue with anybody going over it, but it's the hypocrisy.
Yeah, I don't care where you go.
Well, I think if you go over to Qatar, that's not used then going over there and saying that you're promoting all of Qatari law. Yeah. When somebody comes over here, that's not them supporting, our Gender Recognition Act or our Equality Act. Going to a country and doing any sort of thing to promote any organisation, whether that be FIFA or any other organisation. That's not you promoting their laws. I mean, that's ridiculous. But it's the fact that Joe was so hypocritical about this whole thing. And if he did say that he, if you go over there and support it, then that means you're supporting the negative treatment of migrant workers, or you're supporting the sort of negative laws around gay people. And he went over there. I think that tells you a lot about what he actually believes.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely right. Will Geddes, up to you for your second one.
So, a kind of a mainstay for me, Mike, so it's not going to come as a huge surprise, but it is the lovely SHAMIMA Begum.
Oh,
who
yes.
is like
beautiful.
The proverbial bad penny that keeps turning up.
Yeah.
And
keeps changing your image as well.
Yeah,
She looks
she looks a bit like Meghan
well,
there.
you know,
doesn't
she's
she?
been
there you go.
apparently sacrificing her
Straight off
food
the catwalk.
parcels so she can buy Western clothes for each of her interviews.
Yeah.
But she keeps popping up on various podcasts now. And it's almost like a bit of a stock record where she's just keeps turning up again and again and again. I feel terribly sorry for the family, but every single time I hear her talking, there is absolutely no attrition. There is no repentance for anything that she's said or she's done. And there's a lot of excuses and reasoning that there could be, repercussions on her in the camp. She could be targeted by other ISIS supporters who might see her as being, turning against the ideology. But fundamentally, there's no any kind of apology for her actions. And if anything, there's this kind of brushing over of the fact of what she actually did on the ground there.
It actually
and
goes
there's been
further,
reported.
doesn't it? Because recently her lawyers have started painting her as a victim
Yeah,
of child
of child
trafficking.
trafficking, yeah.
And I thought, well, actually, intellectually, that's quite a compelling argument, but you didn't make it many years ago.
No,
You've just
exactly.
come up with this very belatedly.
But even
and
still-
also, it doesn't acknowledge the whole contribution that she's made since then.
Well, I
Since
think it
being-
demeans actually child trafficking in many ways, because, certainly one of the things that she makes very clear is that she went out there with her friends.
Voluntarily,
She
they-
talks about the information that she gathered about Islamic State and that a lot of it was prismed by supporters of Islamic State telling her what it was actually like and contesting. But I did my own research of when the first torture and horrific videos for ISIS propaganda started coming out. And they were out at least a year before she actually left for
There's
Syria.
no doubt in my
Perfectly
mind.
aware.
Yeah. There's no way you
doubt
could
in my
get
mind.
her.
She knew all about it and she knew everything.
Yeah,
And there's
exactly.
no doubt in my mind she's a disgusting criminal. But I do
Yeah.
think that she's a British criminal and that she's nobody else's problem but ours. She should be rotting in a British cell, not doing these podcasts. She should be in jail here.
But the
Well,
problem you've got, and then the mistake she made, and I'm glad that we, as a country, have proved her wrong, was she thought she was going to wander around the Islamic State and then come back to Britain. The reason she wants to come back to Britain is that her terrorist organisation was defeated.
Yeah.
Now, and I'll tell you the other
Exactly.
reason. I would agree with Reem in terms of bringing her back, but I will tell you, if we bring her back to Britain, she'll get 2 minutes
She'll be out
probation.
of jail
Oh,
and-
and two
And then the
council
book,
houses.
then
and
the
all-
film.
All the family, all the family will be on the
guest,
social.
she'll be guest editing today's programme.
Exactly.
by,
Yeah, that's right.
So is this a wider
She's
question
such a
about...
fascinating woman.
No,
really?
Example,
No.
You see, as harsh and as cruel as it might sound, an example has to be made.
I
Yes,
agree.
This is
Yeah.
Islamic State is not the last terrorist organisation that will be created or generate, and we have to show that if you, as a British national, choose to go and join
Yeah.
a group that is opposed to the way that we
Yeah.
live in this country, that you will be left stateless. You will be left not as a burden to the taxpayer. Not that we have to comfort and pay for conditions which are going to be probably fantastically nice compared to
aye.
what she's in.
Well, I think this is a
and then be
wider-
released out into the public to profiteer from
Yeah.
it. No,
It's a
goodbye.
great-
I mean,
You're on
we
your
get-
own.
It's
we get-
another great idea for the BBC. Imagine the podcast department going, what should we do now? Oh, I know, let's do one with SHAMIMA Begum. That's a good idea. Anyway, we're out of time for that particular section. Coming up, we're going to be talking about one of the world's richest men and a company that keeps doing things anti-royal family. I wonder why. This is Plank of the Week. It's nearly Christmas. Get with it. Welcome back to a very festive edition of Plank of the Week. As you can see, the snow's been falling, although that's kind of disappeared now because it's warmed up a bit. But in real life, here we are sitting. I've got two Santas here on either side of me. I haven't got any names for them, but
I'm
very much enjoying this. I like the trees and everything. No expense has been spared to make this place look a bit more festive. Now, the chance for Isabel Oakeshott is to give your second plank of the week, and I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, my second plank is Pat Cullen, the head of the Royal College of Nursing, who has been whipping her members up into a frenzy, getting them all out on the picket line, or so she claims. And I'm just looking at her social media, her Twitter feed, and there's lots of pictures of her smiling sweetly with nurses on the picket line, going on about how brave and determined they are. And the thing that rankled me the most was where she's saying, you know, it's all about the patients, so, you know, determined to stand up for the patients. Look, this is about many things, and they have, in my view, quite a strong case for substantially better pay. But it isn't about the patients. Let's be honest about this. Let's not pretend, as they always seem to with these things. Remember the junior doctors' strike? They also pretended this was about patient safety. No, it's not. It's about you thinking you're not paid enough, you're worth more. And look, the nurses, I think, are actually worth more and should be paid more. But I'd like to see a bit more honesty. And I also think that the strikes in the run-up to Christmas, at the most difficult time of year, weather-wise, when a lot of old people are not well, there's a huge amount of illness going around at the moment, is a deplorable thing to do.
Do you believe that she cried the night before the strike because she was so upset that it was taking place, or do you reckon she just made that up?
I think I wouldn't want to accuse anyone of lying in that way.
Come on.
But I think the other thing that the RCN has been a bit economic with the truth about is just exactly how many nurses have actually gone out on strike. Because I keep seeing the up to 100,000 figure. Now, I've been in journalism a very long time, and I may possibly have used the phrase up to on a number of occasions in my journalistic career to mean anything from 1 to the top figure that you present.
Right.
And actually, the only official figures that I've read for the number of nurses that actually walked out was around 11,000 on the second day. Bearing in mind that the nursing workforce is over 300,000, it is a tiny fraction of nurses. They are making an awful lot of noise. And I think that there's a huge political thing here. As you said, Mike, it's not necessarily all nurses on those picket lines.
I think it's very clear that an awful lot of other sort of people have joined.
Piggybacking on it.
Yeah, piggybacking. You see an awful lot of socialist worker banners. You know, so you've got the usual renter mob coming out from all sorts of places. And they all seem terribly well rehearsed. You know, I mean, they don't look like, you know, bring me you're tired and you're hungry and you're overworked and desperate people. They all look pretty well fed for a start. So I don't think they're eating any scraps. I don't think they're eating any scraps off anybody's plates in hospital. Also, who does that? You know, oh, look, here's the a pneumonia ward. I'll just finish off what they didn't want. OK, then that seems like a good idea.
Is that what they're claiming that they do?
Yeah, well, that's what she claimed that they were doing on Question Time, right? And not once was she even challenged on the fact that nurses are so poor that they can't actually afford to pay for their own food.
I
know.
This gets on my nerves, by the way, in general. The left are obsessed with this view there's a famine. Like, they went on about the Brexit famine. Now the nurses are eating off the plates. I mean, I went on a TV show once. I got banned because I suggested that nurses were not starving to death. I mean, it was just unbelievable. By the way,
that'll teach you. Did they have a buffet at this particular TV show? You know, because we don't have one, but I can offer you some chocolates later.
But nurses, the average nurse is on a package of £50,000 a year, which I admit is not a king's ransom.
Hang on, I'm not sure that's quite right.
Well, 35,000 plus 15 grand pension.
Well, they get a decent pension, that's for sure, and they also have incremental.
I don't think they quite get 50,000. They certainly don't feel.
I mean, even those who are on 27,000 are doing better than that because they do get incremental amounts of money. But it's not. I don't object to them having a pay rise. Like Isabel, you know, we're not monsters. You know, we don't go no, keep them under there and don't give them any money and don't give them any food. The point is that I don't like the lies that are being put forward by the union leaders who try and make out that, you know, these are the most badly treated people in the history of the world. It really isn't like that. Anyway, time for your next nomination, Andre.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about Harry and Meghan, and I think this is related. Netflix, I'm so sick of them dining out on damaging this country. The latest example is that they've got the person acting as Princess Diana is going to be in an open coffin depicting somebody who died in quite a tragic situation.
It's awful, isn't it?
I just find it's become gratuitous. And one of the worries that I've got on on a serious note, is the way that around the world this country is being denigrated and being humiliated.
Yeah.
And I think that obviously King Charles has to strike back. But I'll tell you something else that's morally bankrupt about it.
But he can't really, can he? How is he going to strike back
he
in
can't.
any
Well,
way without looking, you know, either small-minded or sort of bitter or angry?
But here's the thing that makes
can't
me
be any
like,
of those things.
I mean, this nomination is for Netflix for all the stuff they've done. Oh, and by the way, Harry and Meghan are now doing a thing that's inspired by the leadership of Nelson Mandela. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, but they've just nicked that because that was something that was produced by a completely different company, and they've now just kind of piggybacked onto the top of it and gone, oh, we thought we'd do this documentary series.
But finally, in my nomination, I would point out, and it's not the nomination, I appreciate Reem did it, but... you know, Harry's really upset about the death of his mother, not so bothered about a gratuitous depiction of her from the company that paid him $100 million.
Also, I mean, the problem with Netflix is that they've forgotten what the difference is between reality and fiction. And The Crown has now become this rather ridiculous show, which is not as much watched apparently now as it used to be. Partly because people now remember actually what they're watching. So they're seeing a depiction of something.
Recent,
because you know, of all the things that they're depicting, there was never coverage of Diana lying in a coffin.
No.
It just didn't happen. And
Also,
so that's completely made up.
I mean, from a purely graphic and a horrific level, bearing in mind the injuries that she sustained in that fatal car crash, why would they even sort of suggest having the idea of recreating an open coffin?
Well, it may be that there was an open coffin at some point, but it certainly wasn't open to the public.
Doubt that.
Well, it certainly wasn't open to the public. I mean, I actually saw a picture of Diana, which a lot of people saw in the press after the accident happened, and she actually didn't look particularly bad.
Because I don't think her head was...
No, there was no. I mean, there was a trickle of blood coming out the corner of her mouth, and it was an incredible picture to see. There was a picture that all the British press refused to use.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was used by one, I think, German publication on the internet, and then it was taken away. But you know, that's not the issue. The issue is it's not something that we saw.
It's just
so therefore, we shouldn't be recreating something that wasn't there.
And people believe that it's factual.
Yeah. I know.
People think that The Crown is fact because of how much we've seen. But I think you're right, Mike. Now these are stories that are sort of coming out that people remember. It's a sort of recent memory.
It's a different thing altogether.
Yeah, exactly. So now people sort of remember that these things aren't true. So I think now actually what we'll see is The Crown's viewership will drop because people know that this stuff is just fantasy. It is just made up, and actually it's a complete dramatisation.
And it's designed to damage the royal family. Exactly right. It's time for your final nomination.
So I'm going to be nominating Elon Musk.
Very brave of you.
It is very brave.
Well done.
Bye-bye to your blue tick.
Well, so Elon Musk, I actually thought was quite sort of the cool guy of the billionaire world. But then he decided to put out a tweet and sort of say, actually, I'm going to step down if Twitter decides that I should. And I think that he didn't expect people to vote against him, but people voted for him to step down as Twitter CEO after just a few weeks. So I think that he sort of shot himself in the foot there. And
do you think he was looking for some secret validation from
I think he was. I think he wanted to
prove
What a surprise on social media.
Oh, no, Elon, you're brilliant. No,
I thought he was looking for an excuse to get out of it.
Well, I've heard that there is a sort of there is a school of thought which says that actually he didn't really want to be running it because it's quite a hard job running a company, and he's got other companies to run.
Yeah, exactly.
And he might prefer, rather than stepping aside because it might look weak, he might say, well, if they ask me to go, then I'll just do what they want.
I think he wanted the validation. I think he sort of people have sort of criticised him for the way that he's decided to run Twitter for numerous occasions. I actually think he was doing pretty well.
I quite like
the
it.
direction of
me too.
free speech and allowing all of these other different accounts that have been banned previously to come back. I think it's brilliant. I think he was doing a pretty good job, but he's just shot himself in the foot by putting out this tweet, and then now he's forced to step down.
Well, maybe he
really.
won't end up doing it. I mean, I agree with you. I liked what he was doing with Twitter. I actually don't resent paying a little bit for the blue tick. I think he's got to monetise it because he's saying it's actually in billions of pounds problematic financial situation. My problem with him actually dates back way years ago when he libelled that guy that went to the Thai.
On the
pedo guy.
football team.
Well, but he was. Yeah, I mean, obviously the guy was a hero, not a paedophile
but that's how he's remembered, isn't it?
But
guy.
Stand by. Get the lawyers on standby.
But I know,
but
obviously,
you're
I know he
laughing
wasn't.
about that, and I just think it was
of course he's not.
absolutely horrific. And the guy's, Elon Musk is a billionaire. He could easily have afforded to pay compensation. Say sorry, I'm an idiot. I shouldn't have said
Didn't
that.
he? I think he did pay a deal
I
behind
don't
the
think
scenes.
he
No, he did. The guy got
Yeah.
paid out.
Well,
I mean,
that was-
I live to be libelled by Elon Musk.
Yeah, it would be
Yeah.
great,
You
wouldn't
know,
it,
I'd be
Mike?
more than happy.
See
I
what
don't
we
care
can
what he
do.
calls me.
But that incident was related to Elon Musk. Didn't he send some ludicrous submarine
Yeah, he
invention
had a submarine
to
that
No,
take
he,
had-
no, he
scientists
wanted
out?
to send a
Yeah.
submarine, but the
And they were
guy
like,
said it wouldn't
look,
be.
I'm sorry, it's caves, right?
Yeah.
You can't send a
No,
submarine.
but that was the beginning of the row. That's because he's, you know, he doesn't take criticism terribly well.
No, he
But there we
doesn't.
are. Listen, coming up, we're going to have the final part of the show, which of course involves me choosing who the plank of the week is, but also nominating my final individual. And you might be surprised that somebody whose name has already appeared on this very show. We'll be back with plank of the week, the festive version, after this. Welcome back to the final section of Plank of the Week, the festive version. As you can see, we are festooned with all manner of great Christmassy type things, including 2 small Santas, a couple of trees, and some cotton wool, which purports to be snow. Of course, we don't want any of that over the course of the Christmas. I'll tell you what's been quite surprising is nobody's mentioned the RMT. And incredibly,
I guess we're just bored of
incredibly,
talking about
they don't make the list
Don't
this week,
care anymore.
even though Christmas Eve, which will be the night
Appalling.
after this, is going to be completely kiboshed by them.
Really?
And you won't be able to get a train probably for the best part of the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe the RMT should be in there. But I'm not going to put the RMT in there because they've had enough mentions. I am, however, going to put in as my final nominee the one and only Gary Neville. Who we spoke about a bit earlier on, because this is the very week. Forget about what he said about Qatar. Forget about him taking the money from beIN Sport, which is the Qatari state broadcaster, but more because of what he said when he was on ITV, where it was during the middle of the World Cup, the halftime
Preaching.
a chat as they were discussing whether he was right to say that Lionel Messi was finished, which he clearly isn't.
Oh, really?
That was the other part of Gary Neville's unfortunate trip to Qatar, was that he said right at the beginning, he said the problem with Lionel Messi now is he's past it and all you've got to do is tackle him, because that's all you have to do. And of course, Lionel Messi is now the hero of the World Cup, having scored loads of goals and is now holding the cup aloft. But anyway, so he decided to get into some rant during the half-time conversation, not only about how Qatar shouldn't really have such disparity between rich and poor, but he also said, let's not forget that we've got a government which is terrorising working people and terrorising people who work on the railways, terrifying nurses, you know, absolutely, you know, refusing workers' rights and making out literally that Britain was like Qatar.
Yes.
And of course, it was pointed out to him later that actually, you know, we don't actually kill people, we don't actually put you in prison for being gay, and we don't actually make you work as a slave until such time as you drop dead from exhaustion. He hasn't apologised. He thought it was very funny. The ITV have said that if he ever comes back on again, they will tell him in no uncertain terms not to say any of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not question time,
It's
is
really
it?
not
It
question
wasn't
time. And also,
Exactly.
even worse for
He's a
him, it was
football
revealed that he
correspondent.
runs a hotel up in Manchester called Hotel Football, where he pays...
Hotel Football, that's
Yeah.
a smart name.
Original.
How did they go out with that?
He's in partnership with that great bastion of morality, Ryan Giggs. And he also pays minimum wage to the people that work there.
I'll tell you what
kidding
made me laugh in that statement. There was something about the linguistics of it. It went, well, I'm very worried about political MPs. Nothing says expertise in politics like referring to people as political MPs.
What?
And also he said that political MPs were taking money from their political parties from foreign sources, which is in fact incorrect.
Yes.
The reality is the reason why this man shouldn't be talking about politics is he's demonstrably not qualified. He
No,
doesn't
he's
know
not.
what he's talking
Well,
about.
no, he's a complete idiot. He's like Andy Burner with his brain removed. It sounds the same, looks a bit similar, but
Is
there
he
we
not
are.
a member of the Labour Party?
Yeah, he
Right,
is.
well, they're wrong.
He
Right.
also voted when Jeremy Corbyn was running against Boris Johnson. He wanted Jeremy Corbyn to be the
Of
Prime
course
Minister.
he was a Corbyn
He was a
supporter.
Corbynite,
I mean,
of
it
course.
explains a
Now
lot, doesn't it?
I'm being charged with picking the winner here, and the trouble is, I can only think that the 2 nominations that I've made are the 2 most worthy winners.
I beg you for
Yeah,
LYCETT.
yeah.
Joe
Surprised me.
Lysett and Gary
Please,
Neville.
please,
I mean,
Lysett.
Gary Neville has
Yeah.
been all over the papers a lot, so I think maybe we should make it Joe Lysett. Would you all be in agreement with that?
Absolutely
Joe Lysett,
right.
Yeah.
you know, champagne
Absolutely right.
That's my
socialist.
vote.
comedian that's not funny, lefty. I mean, he qualifies on all sorts of counts.
Funny to look at.
Absolutely
He's
brilliant.
manna from heaven.
Well,
for this
listen, I
show.
hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. Thank you to everybody who's sitting around watching this. Thank you to Andre. Thank you to Reem. Thank you to Will. Thank you to Isabel, of course. We will see you after Crimbo. We'll see you in the new year. This is Plank of the Week. Happy Christmas.